Greetings, this is Gremlin and I welcome you to the 7th part of my guide. Today I will be talking about what is the most fun about Diablo 3. It's about building DPS. This will include weapon setups and how to build the stain, because it goes kinda hand in hand with how you build your DPS. This will be quite a bit technical and I will be using my crappy bitmap there again. But there's no way around that to go a bit into the theory behind that, to really teach you how to build DPS. About the weapon setups, there are 3 possibles. It's the classical sword and board that was used by many monks soon after the release of Diablo. Then it's the 2-hand setup I chose here for the set. And it's dual wield that it's the most common, I think. Each setup has its pros and cons, and yeah, I will be talking about that, of course. Up to now I just kinda gave you minimal markers like get the stats and you will be fine to do this or that. But I want you to be able to judge yourself if stuff is good enough for you, if it's a real upgrade or the right choice to pick. So yeah, I will be going a bit more into detail now and talk a bit more about the theory. So yeah, weapon setups first then. So yeah, what weapon setup to choose? At some point you really want to invest some more gold into your weapons, so getting an idea where you want to go and where you want to end up is really beneficial. So it's about the decision whether you go with 2-hand weapons, with dual wield, or with sword and board. Of course, sword and board, it doesn't need to be a sword, it's just about having a shield. The pros about sword and board is obviously that you gain a lot of armor and the block chance to mitigate some damage. Shields can get 10% critical hit chance and they can gain a lot of stats. So this is obviously the good thing about that. The downside is, even if it sounds kind of ironical, is to get you the stain sorted. This is mainly because this is stain stats, so I mean healing stats by that, like life on hit, life steal, life after kill, if you want to consider that stat. They can have the highest rolls on weapons, or well, for monks life steal is only on weapons, so if you use up 1 slot with a shield, you only have 1 weapon left, or 1 slot left to get really high sustain stats, or you are strapped down to get the sustain stats on your jewelry. Getting high damage jewelry and life on hit on them, that gets expensive. Getting a high DPS weapon with high life on hit and life steal as well gets expensive as well. So yeah, in a sense it's the downside of going with a shield. The good thing of course is the mitigation and the high armor and well the critical hit chance. So that's about the sword and board. The next thing is 2-hand or 2-hand weapons. The good thing about 2-hand weapons is that if you have a set budget, there's almost nothing that outperforms going with a 2-hand weapon, DPS wise. And you can get a good amount of life steal there for quite easy. So, and getting more than 5% life steal almost gets you sorted completely with your sustain. This of course depends a bit on what DPS you got and what mitigation you got, but in general having more than 5% life steal is a very PG thing to have. So this is the good thing about two-hand weapons, to get high DPS easy and good sustain. The downside is that it's well, it's slow. Two-hand weapons are slow by default. That's how they gain their high damage range, and this results in two things. It feels slow. Most people don't like that. They like to have the feeling to attack fast with dual wield. And well, the technical part about having a slow weapon is the spirit regeneration or spirit generation. You really want to be able to spam your mantra, but for that you need quite some decent spirit income. You need about 1.5 attacks per second to be able to spam your mantra somewhat okay. You will have slight gaps in your mantra spam there still, but about 1.5 attacks per second is okay enough. With two-hand weapons, however, this is not too easy to achieve. There are some certain legendaries like the Warmonger. It's a sword, so it has by default 1.1 attacks per second, and then it got an attack speed roll by default. So it's normally around 1.18, 1.20 in that range attacks per second by default from the weapon. So it's not too hard to cross the 1.5 attacks per second. Just get roughly around 3 parts of your gear with attack speed and you're fine with two-hand weapons. But yeah, that's the pros and cons about two-hand weapons. Two-hand weapons, you can get high DPS and good sustain with lower budget. But it's slow and you need to care a bit to get attack speed on your gear for, well, to not feel too slow if you care about that, and to have somewhat okay spirit regeneration or generation. So that's about the two-hand weapons. Dual wield is the most common setup, and it's mostly available or broadly available because there's so many one-hand weapons on the auction house normally, and a big well, you have a lot of options with one-hand weapons on the auction house, so you really can pick your weapons how you like them, with your sustain setup and your DPS distribution and so on. However, and the pro additionally to that is, technically on paper you can get the highest DPS with a dual wield setup. You need kinda perfect weapons though, both with very high DPS, and well, what makes it technically the best DPS setup is that you can get, in theory, 400 critical hit damage on the weapons, 100% as default, as a space roll on the weapon, and then 100% additionally with a socket. And that 2 times gets you 400 critical hit damage then. And you can get quite okay stats in total there as well. The downside, however, is compared to the other setups, it's the most expensive, especially on high DPS ranges. And getting +5 lifesteal requires you to get lifesteal on both weapons. This narrows down your upgrade options there. Yeah, that's about the pros and cons for dual wield. The pros being that you have a lot of options to choose from, and that it's technically the best DPS you can gain. Though the downside is that it's quite expensive to achieve that. Yep, so that's about the general ideas of the weapon setups. And now I will be talking about the theory behind building DPS in Diablo, and I will do that with a crappy bitmap. Building your DPS in Diablo 3 is in a sense the most complicated thing, and in another sense the most easy thing. I know this is quite a contradiction, but I will explain what I mean by that. There are a lot of damage modifiers that factor in the DPS equation, and that normally confuses people because they have a lot of stuff to consider. And there's also the difference between the paper DPS that appears on your character screen or character sheet and the effective DPS you really ditch out. Monks are the class with the lowest paper DPS, but Sweeping Wind skill and the mantra we got, the conviction, adds up to our effective DPS quite a lot. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff to consider, and that's the difficult part about building the DPS. The easy thing is, though, once you figure that out, how to properly build up your DPS, there's no magic behind it anymore. It's just about get more of everything. Just get more damage modifiers on your gear and get better rolls on them. There's no magic behind that. There's a concept behind that, though. If you have seen my part about building effective health points, or if you have read up on that somewhere, to build up your effective health points, you want to distribute your armor and resist in a somewhat even way, and build a square, to speak in a figurative way there. The same concept applies to the DPS modifiers. You just have more dimensions, so you are building a cube and not a square. So just a short run through the damage modifiers. You prefer critical hit chance. That is where you should put your main focus on, because the better your critical hit chance is, the more cyclones you generate with Sweeping Winds. And yeah, maybe it's a bit sad. I don't mind. Sweeping Winds is a very mandatory skill if you want to deal a lot of DPS as Monk, and the Cyclone Rune just provides the best DPS, and that works very, very well with critical hit chance, because each critical hit will just generate a Cyclone, and that adds up to your effective DPS. So that's just the way Monks roll, and you have to live with that. So yeah, that's why you prefer critical hit chance. Of course, if you have a high critical hit chance, critical hit damage works very well with that. So this is the classical way to build up your DPS when you start on. Get up your critical hit chance and add a lot of critical hit damage. And at a certain point you start adding increased attack speed as well, to just get more volume covered. The dexterity, of course, is our main stat that just scales up the figure you build here. So yeah, it just scales up your damage by a set percentage. And there's of course the weapon damage just provided by, well, of course, your weapons. And there's some other affixes, like the average damage on the jewelry, that just adds up to your weapon damage. So it's not an affix alone, or a factor, if you want to call it like that. It just adds up to your weapon damage. Another nice thing, though, is some legendaries have an affix that's like adds a certain amount of percentage of damage as fire, elemental, or as holy, or as some kind of magic damage to your overall DPS. So but let's just assume that just adds up to your weapon damage. Let's just make it a bit easier. So in a sense, weapon damage is a like fourth dimension, but yeah, just try to build it up as well. So of course you want to have high DPS on your weapons. However, if you go with this affix, try to get a black weapon if you really want to build up your DPS with that, like with the inner belt and with the Zunimasa boots, for example. If you consider going with this stat, get a black weapon. So a black weapon is a weapon that just got high damage by a physical damage modifier, not elemental or not magic. So the icon of the weapon is just black. There's no blue, for example, for lightning damage or cold, or no yellowish color behind that for holy or something. It's just black. So if you go with this affix, it just adds up to the physical damage you have on your character. So you want to have a black weapon to get the most DPS out of it. Okay, that being said, and yeah, you want to have your critical hit chance as main focus to build up the DPS. Let's just assume you want to spend, let's say, 9 DPS points. Let's just call it like that. So to make it a bit easier on the explain, let's say, okay, you know, I need to have a good critical hit chance. I just invest 5 points into critical hit chance, and then I go with 3 points in critical hit damage. And so, yeah, my bitmap skills are not the best, but I hope to be able to convey a somewhat decent picture there. So 5, 3, and 1. So we spend our 9 points. 1 in attack speed, 3 in critical hit damage, and 5 in critical hit chance. So that's 5 by 3 by 1. That's 15 volume points, so to speak. We did build with our DPS. Let's just say we get a slight different distribution. We only put 2 into critical hit damage, and we put 2 into our attack speed. So so that will mean we have 5 by 2 by 2. That's 20 volume points. So by just a slightly different distribution, we gained 5 DPS points really there, in a sense. So volume points with your DPS. So yeah, I think you get the picture. You try to build a cube in a sense. You have your main focus on critical hit chance because of the sweeping winds to generate more cyclones, but in general you try to make a cube, and especially if the more cubey your figure is you did build, the better your dexterity scales in, because if you scale up this green figure by, let's say, 100%, so we have 20 points, so increasing by 100% each side, you get a lot more points as if you would increase the red figure by 100% or scale it up. That's the reason why you try to get as many damage affixes as possible on your gear. And it's the same with building effective health points. Don't go out of your way to just build a cube. So don't reduce your critical hit chance by all costs to be able to build a perfect cube. Just try to make it cubey, if that makes any sense to you. So yeah, that's the theoretical idea behind that. And then it just comes down to figure out where to get the most damage affixes for your budget, and that just requires a bit knowledge about which stats can go on which slot and which legendaries provide some hidden damage modifiers that are not usually able to get there by rares. So that's behind the whole thing behind the theory. I did build an example set with a 10 millish budget to give you a real case there to explain a bit on, and I will just go on and explaining what I did with the set there.